Boy, I'm having to record this one pretty late tonight, and that's not because of me. I've, been relatively free today. I could have done this morning, but I wanted to wait for the president's press conference today because, of course, today is Sunday, and that's when a lot of the rumors that have been going around surrounding these movements of the National Guard across the country, across many states, including the state I'm in. People were saying that, and there were folks even within the National Guard who were leaking to various people. I heard them, but of course, nobody at the top, no generals or anything like that. Actually, I don't know if they're called generals in the National Guard, but basically there was this rumor that a national lockdown was going to go into effect, probably this Sunday, because a Sunday is when it makes the most sense to do that, because everybody's at home anyway. Most of the business across the country are already closed to begin with. Folks tend to be at home on Sunday night, so if you announce this on a Sunday night, that would be when you want to do this. And of course, if there was, and if not, they would have to wait a whole another week. And going into this weekend, we had people from all across the country. You had a strange flurry of op-eds, in mainstream media publications like The Hill and the major newspapers around this country, begging President Trump to declare a national lockdown. That is a very popular position right now within the mainstream media. People feel like everywhere needs to be locked down, largely because the people in the mainstream media live in places like New York City and Washington, D.C., these densely populated cities, to where it's very easy to contain, to spread things around. And thankfully, even today, during President Trump's press conference, which I watched from the beginning, and he was very late getting out there, which made me nervous because it made me think that they were deliberating something, but before they came out and did the press conference. But it was a very long press conference, almost 2 hours, and was fairly late getting started. And I watched all the way through, and he actually beat down on the idea that there should be a national lockdown. He made it pretty clear that is not something that we need. And so I certainly hope that he's not just completely talking out of his ass, and that is not a complete lie, because we don't want that. The way that this was being floated in the mainstream media this week, it made me feel like it was a trial balloon. It made me feel like that the media was conditioning people for what was about to come, because of course you had Cuomo getting up there every day and basically saying, hey, we don't just want to lock down the state of New York. We want to lock down everywhere. It's not effective if we just lock down the state of New York. So I guess that's one good thing. And so considering that it didn't come tonight, that we did not get that national lockdown, it doesn't guarantee that it'll never come. But it seems at this point that that's not the direction things are moving in. But that does not mean that the screws are not tightening in specific places all around the country. I believe a total of 8 states now have shelter-in-place orders. And I believe in some of these states, it's only, in certain localities. Like in Idaho, I believe there's one county that is on lockdown. I believe Athens, Georgia, is under lockdown. But in other cases, you have places like Louisiana, interestingly enough. You would think, a southern state, maybe some places be a little more free. They're on lockdown right now. Ohio is on lockdown right now statewide. You have Delaware is on lockdown statewide. Kentucky, I believe they didn't use the language shelter in place, but they are on lockdown statewide. In New York, I believe all the businesses as of today are shut down statewide. But not to a total. It's not I don't think it's exactly a shelter-in-place order. I believe that the way that Cuomo's doing it is like Kentucky. It's just ordering all non-essential businesses to close, or rather, I think they used the language reduce function by 100% or something. He used a similar phraseology when talking about trying to build up the hospital system. He said he wanted to increase hospital beds and ICU beds by 100%. Well, that just means that he's going to double them. When you reduce function of all non-essential businesses by 100%, that means, of course, that you're just going to reduce it to 0. Now, there's been major moves economically today. The stimulus bill that was which again, in my opinion, is not going to work. I don't think that the stimulus bills, do much of anything. I think that, even under normal circumstances, Keynesian fiscal stimulus is counterproductive. Keynesian monetary stimulus is counterproductive because the reason why you're having recession, just in short, is because you've got substantial imbalances in the structure of production in the economy as a result of the financial system. This is a financial problem. We're in a financial crisis. Well, I shouldn't say all, but the business cycle is a financial phenomenon. The financial system distorts the real economy because of, well, not just because of the Fed. It also happened before the Fed, but because of fluctuations in money supply. It's rather complicated. I won't get into it right now, but that's all you need to know. And so when you have counter-cyclical policy, so to speak, to where you're trying to pump the economy up as it's crashing, what it's doing when it's crashing is it's purging out all of those imbalances, all of the bad debt, for example, all of the loans that shouldn't have been issued to begin with, all of the bonds that cannot be paid. These are all being defaulted on. The bond holders and the lenders are taking a haircut, and all of the resources that are tied up in these inefficient modes of production can be liquidated and repurposed for better and more profitable ends that better suit society and market interests. And so by dumping money into that situation and trying to get to people to prop up these businesses that are crashing, you're just slowing down the process and making it all that more painful. Nevertheless, the stock market, the people in the stock market wanted to see this. They were looking for this kind of an action. While overall this is not going to do much to help, what it can do is improve the morale on Wall Street. And that's really what Congress needed to achieve this weekend. Congress did not want, I shouldn't say, I don't know about all of Congress, but certainly, most of Washington who, wants to be reelected, certainly all the, most of the Republicans in Washington, hopefully not all of them, are this dumb, but most of the Republicans in Washington are concerned with having good news to open the market into tomorrow. I bet they were hoping to have good news, by the time futures opened this evening, which they didn't. But they certainly wanted good news before the open of the markets at 9:30 tomorrow morning. After last week, which was the worst week for Wall Street since 2008, I bet they were hoping to have a bit of an upsurge this week. But the cloture vote, which is sort of the vote to end debate and then move on to a real vote. It's a procedural move in the Senate. That did not pass. I believe there were only 47, yays versus like 47 nays. There are a few, members of the Senate who are not in right now, so it didn't exactly add up to 100 votes. And so the bill's not going forward. The stimulus thing, this is not going to happen. And again, even if it passed cloture, there's still other steps before it gets there, but that's the next step down the road. That would mean that, the stimulus bill is on the way. As of right now, it's been stopped. And of course, today, Nancy Pelosi came out and basically said, hey, the Democrats are not on board with what's going on right now. We're going to start over, and we're coming up with our own stimulus bill in the House. And so, thankfully, as far as I'm concerned, there is not, bipartisan unity right now on this whole, on what the response should be to this whole crisis. There is gridlock, which is exactly what I want because, normally politicians in Washington only agree, on both sides on the worst issues, on all the worst things the government does. That's what people agree on all the big wars, on all the big spending bills. That's when you see bipartisan, support for any measure. But here, things are still very partisan, which I'm happy to see. And so this evening, actually, even before this bill, failed cloture and died in the Senate, stock futures rather opened limit down, which stock futures can only drop or gap up 5%. And then it's closed for the rest of the night. So we're stuck down 5%. That means that tomorrow, S&P is going to open about 105 points down or so. So we're in the S&P is going to be trading with a 21 handle. Should open about 21.85. And that's before pricing in the fact that this bill just died in the Senate. Of course, by the morning, the Senate is not even going to have, it's not even going to be back in session, let alone, have passed this bill or something, which actually, after it fails in cloture, I don't think that they can, just recover it. I think it has to start. I think the process might have to start over again. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not a Senate parliamentarian. I'm not sure that if a bill, fails cloture, if that means that they can just run up another cloture vote, because I guess because cloture is to end debate. So that means that if the cloture vote failed, well then debate should still be going on. So I don't know if that means that the Democrats are going to filibuster this, or if it's it's just sort of a pocket veto type thing. It's been many years since I really followed legislative politics. I used to know these things, actually, believe it or not. I used to be a political junkie, but then I decided that really none of that stuff really mattered. What mattered was material reality and economics, and that had much more to do with what was driving, events in our country. Which is true even now. In this whole scenario, Congress's only role is to, signal to Wall Street, to give them, a news cycle. That's all Congress can do in this case. Now, I almost forgot. Back to, I hate to switch back and forth on topics now, but I don't use notes when I do these, videos. I speak off the top of my head. And something I just remembered was we are seeing coof camps pop up around the country. It's not like all these predictions of the national lockdown happening tonight. It's not like that all those of us who have been really pessimistic and have been, warning that we're moving headlong towards a full police state. Which, again, I shouldn't have to point this out, first world countries like France and Italy and Spain, although Spain and Italy, are they really first world countries? All jokes aside, France, certainly, everybody agrees, America's oldest ally. This is a fully, this is the West. This is Western civilization, France. They are, they have a full police state right now by Macron. Oh, New Jersey, by the way, is apparently gone full police state. They will arrest you and throw you in prison if you are out without a good reason. I believe the exact language that they used was, "We don't want anybody monkeying around," which last I checked, that's a racial slur. So, he should be canceled, whoever that guy is. I'm not sure if it was the governor who said it, or maybe the head of the state police or something like that. But that's going on, and something that Trump's talked about extensively during the press conference is that in Washington, California, and New York, they are building the FEMA camps. The coof camps are coming online, and the National Guard, with federal dollars, is constructing those camps as we speak. You can't see them, and of course they're being set up in other states where they're going to move in eventually too. Florida, I'm sure, is going to have a coof camp in Broward County. The National Guard is already there, setting up their testing centers. I'd imagine that anywhere across the country that you're seeing these testing centers set up by the National Guard is going to, is sort of a forward operating base before they actually move in and construct a full coof camp. And for those of you who haven't been following this since the beginning, a coof camp, is what we call these containment facilities that they were building in China, these very shoddy tent cities in which they would just, put rows and rows and rows of beds where you receive, little to no medical attention and are just sort of left to die. Now, hopefully in the United States, the standard of care will be a little better. Maybe there will be enough doctors. I don't know. But in China, and of course during the Spanish flu, which again, very similar situation here, they also built coof camps during the Spanish flu. People, once they got into this sort of a situation, they were not receiving, individualized care, to say the least. Now, something I'd like to address is that there's been a controversy now amongst a lot of the Trump supporters, namely Bill Mitchell, Chief Boomer on Twitter. He has been, he and others now are saying that the Italy numbers are a lie, that the fatality rate in Italy is not indicative of the fatality rate, what it will be in America and how many people will die. You can't just directly extrapolate. Look at these other countries like Japan that are doing just fine. And while I will say, hey, actually, the Japan point I saw it brought up by Tom Woods. I don't know. Bill Mitchell may have made the same thing, but obviously those are two very different people. Tom Woods is a rational human being, and Bill Mitchell is just a grifty shill. But the point about Japan, I don't know why Japan is doing so well, but Japan already had a much more of a social distancey kind of culture. People are not touchy-feely there. Folks don't, hug or shake hands. They bow at each other, and a lot of people in Japan, wear masks anyway in public. That's not socially unacceptable like it is here or in Italy. And of course, in Italy, they have the problem of kissing each other's face, which doesn't help with the spread of these diseases. But Italy, like Japan, which again, this is a reason why a lot of people predicted that in Japan, this outbreak was going to be terrible, far worse than China, perhaps, because they have such a high elderly population, and this disease, of course, impacts the elderly very heavily. Italy has the second oldest population right after Japan, and we are seeing them impacted very severely. And this is because of their elderly population. And so, the differences between why this, even though Japan and Italy are so old, yet we see such a high death rate in Italy, I would assume that a lot of that is cultural. And of course, Japan doesn't have very much migration going in and out. Yes, there are some Chinese people in Japan. There are Chinese people who visit Japan. But, we heard early on about people who were infected in Japan, and they were infected by people visiting from China, tourists, things like that. And those people very quickly tracked down. Everyone who they had made contact with were tracked down. They were all isolated, and so they were able to stop the spread very early because Japan was keenly aware of this. Other countries like Singapore pursued similar strategies. Of course, South Korea has done something very similar, but their outbreak there got out of hand very early because of the whole Shinji Church debacle, which I believe they're charging the leaders of that church with homicide because of how they willingly spread the virus. So while Japan is quite the anomaly when it comes to all of this, it's not totally inexplicable, and there are differences between Japan and Italy, other than the obvious similarity, which is the age of population, that I think may account for the differences. Like I was saying with the Chinese people, Italy has a lot of Chinese migrant labor that works in northern Italy. And these people were all allowed to return to northern Italy after the Chinese New Year, which, of course, Chinese New Year was canceled in China because of the Wu Flu, to stop the spread of the Wu Flu, because that was when it was taking off and was really, really bad in China. Of course, I still think it's probably really, really bad in China, considering how many more deaths you now have in Italy versus China. Makes you think that the Chinese numbers are not entirely accurate. So anyway, considering that Italy does have an older population than the U.S., it is fair to say that the U.S. probably will not have as high of a death rate. I don't think that you can really, though, say, hey, don't compare the U.S. to Italy. Look at Japan. Japan, nothing bad happened to them. The outbreak is already far worse in the U.S. than it has ever been in Japan. I think it's obvious that the U.S. Is going to have a far worse experience with this virus overall when all is said and done than Japan. And there are very clear differences culturally between the U.S. and Japan that will make containing this virus so much more difficult. I don't think that the American people are going to take kindly to being cooped up in their homes or hauled off to coof camps. This just isn't something that we're wired for. It's not, it's not how we're raised. It's not how we live. It's not how any of us have grown up. So my advice is to, not take these people who are still trying to tell you that, hey, this is no big deal, don't worry about it. Just try and block them out, because a lot of them are really either they're delusional or disingenuous at this point, because if you can't see that with 32,000 people now infected in the U.S., and that's all that we're testing, by the way. I'm not even going to get into the whole debacle of testing, which is something else that I wanted to discuss today, but we're going really long. I don't like to go over 20 minutes. But we're not testing nearly aggressively as a place like as South Korea or Singapore. So the government has gotten to the point to where they understand that this is going to get out, so they're not even bothering to test asymptomatic people, because the purpose of testing asymptomatic people is so you can contain it, so that you can say, hey, you're asymptomatic, you should be isolated, and let's find everyone else you've already contacted and isolate them too, so that they don't keep spreading it, because we're way past the stage where you can do that. So the White House's strategy here is not to contain the virus, but to slow its spread. They're not trying, a containment strategy involves testing asymptomatic people. But at this point, I guess they figured there's way too many asymptomatic people. So they repeatedly said, and I don't think this is out of stupidity, I think that this is deliberate. They're saying, Mike Pence said it today, if you're not symptomatic, you don't need to be tested. There's no reason for you to be tested. And the reason why he's saying that is because they don't care if you're spreading it to other people, as long as you're abiding by the distancing measures. They are gambling that will slow the spread enough, even if there are people out there spreading it. They're minimizing social interactions in this country to the point to where that will be enough to deal with. That the minority of people who are going to get infected by this and will be symptomatic can be dealt with. That is what they're basing that whole strategy on, and that's why they're building so many of these big coof camps to house all of the sick people. And of course, this is going to be different. That's going to play out differently in different parts of the country. As President Trump said today, you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach, which, again, this is what I was very encouraged to hear from him, that, it made it seem clear to me that philosophically he is opposed to a national lockdown. You can say, oh, well, maybe that's a psyop. Maybe he's just trying to condition you so that you're not scared and then, lock things down. But, I feel like that'd create a lot of panic if he, went out and did the exact opposite of what he's saying here. But he made it clear that, you've got places like Idaho and Iowa, where people are very spread out, to where, telling people to stay in their homes really, doesn't make much sense, because they're not going to be out infecting each other anyway, really. There's just not that much social interaction to begin with, so you don't need to have those tight restrictions. It's not like a place like New York City, to where people are crammed into these little subway cars, or into, city buses, or are walking down the street next to each other, or going in and out of taxi cabs all day. And so what that means is that this very tight lockdown, like we're seeing in Europe, probably will come, as I've been saying, to certain parts of the country, but it will not be evenly spread out throughout the entire country. You're not going to see the same level of lockdown. Again, this is just a matter of practical reality. Whether this was official policy or not, you were never going to see the level of lockdown in the middle of rural Idaho as you are going to see in New York City. But that doesn't necessarily, make me feel safe, since I am in one of these big, densely populated states like Florida. People in the state of New York, even though you're not in New York City, there's some very, sparsely populated parts of the state of New York. They're under the same restrictions now as New York City. Those restrictions may not be as enforceable, but they're in place. And seeing how things are breaking out in South Florida, to where Broward and Miami-Dade are getting hit very hard by this, because, of course, those are very densely populated areas, I imagine that we here in Florida are going to see a shelter-in-place order at some point that will be enforced by the National Guard. Because, of course, considering how old our population is, and I'm not sure exactly relative to Japan or Italy how old, we might have an even older population here in Florida, since we import old people from the rest of the country and we export our young people. Young people all the time move out of Florida, and old people are always moving into it. I think it's clear that other than your most highly populated areas like New York City and LA that just have so many people close together, they're going to spread it very quickly and rack up a lot of deaths. We in Florida, because of the vulnerability of our population, even if it is a little more spread out, could probably see the most deaths. And so the government here, I'm sure, or at least I would imagine, is taking that into account and realizing that they're going to have to they're going to have to be a little more strict here than in other parts of the country. Perhaps if you live in Alabama, you're going to be in a little better position than I am, just because of the nature of this disease and the response that it warrants. So with all that said, if you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow, and I will shortly be talking about what the markets do. Will be interesting to see if, I would imagine we'll probably hit limit down pretty soon after the open tomorrow, because, that jump from 5% down to 7% down is not going to be too big. But who knows? Maybe we'll get a bounce tomorrow. Maybe the Senate will come out with something by 3:30, which of course is the old time where we used to have the daily ramp, to where every time on a red day we'd go green. But those days are long gone. So I guess that's it.